Hi guys, this is Max. Just to say that the audio from the episode you're about to listen to is a little bit crackly at times, but I think you'll find it's pretty listenable nonetheless. I don't have my usual audio equipment with me right now, so in future episodes that will be rectified. But for now, just note that there's a few occasions where it does crackle, but it soon sorts itself out. And I hope that in spite of that, you find it very listenable. So enjoy. Okay, welcome back and to Make It Conscious and this new series on the future of work, talking about the spiritual component of work, the importance of work, and the role it plays in the development of self-knowledge. Today's episode is called Work versus Contribution. As I said in the previous episode, I don't dispute the word work. I think it's a useful word, but it also carries a bit of a negative connotation, right? As we saw from the poem by Khalil Gibran. All your life you've been told that work is a curse. As we saw from the Bible, we saw from Genesis, that this was Adam's punishment for eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge. But I also provided another interpretation that actually, as hard as that was, and as much as that really sucks, right, to be kicked out of the Garden of Eden, it's also a necessary moment. No one said that life shouldn't contain suffering, right? It's maybe some folks have said that, but that's kind of what life is, right? Marcus Aurelius makes the point that it's a synonym for reality. Suffering and reality are kind of the same thing, or at least they imply each other. And also that suffering is not necessarily a bad thing. And in just the same way, doing work, putting effort in, endeavoring to produce or contribute something need not be a bad thing. And Gibran's beautiful poem was making that very point, that actually to work in line with what you stand to give and what you're able to give is a absolute gift and a privilege. So it doesn't make it any easier in some objective sense, but it does change your relationship to it. So here I'm drawing a contrast between what we might think of as work, which sounds really boring and sort of torturous and something we do because we have to, and only because we have to, versus contribution. Now, it's not that we don't have to work, right? Like, we do have to work. That's the whole point. But it's a question of, well, do you work because you have to only? Can you bring a level of play to that and say, okay, I have to do this, but it's also something I'm going to do voluntarily. I'm going to choose to do it. I'm going to choose to do it well. I'm going to be conscientious. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to bring what I can and see that as an opportunity and a privilege. Because not only is it a privilege to create and to be generous, but also it leads you towards a greater realization of yourself. That's kind of the theme here of this series. Whether it goes right, whether it goes wrong, whether it goes well, whether you end up struggling immensely, which you will if you ever try to do anything, whether it's land a job, build a career, not least if you start your own business or start a company, not least if you start hiring other people and start taking in markets and making an impact in that way, you're going to have a lot of bad days. You're going to have things not going your way almost constantly. If you have a business of any size, there's always going to be something that's going badly in that business. There's always going to be something that's not perfect. There's always going to be a million jobs that you wish you had time to do, but just can't because you don't have time or because it's just not worth it anymore. Everything I do, like personally, I look at videos I made 3 months ago and I think, oh God, I could really improve that. My thinking moves on. I don't necessarily completely disagree with it, or sometimes I do. Sometimes I'll look back and think I would definitely change that. But that's, if you're doing things well, I think that's inevitable. And if you're terrified of that happening, you will never go anywhere. You'll never grow and produce the kind of value that you're capable of doing. Just to recap, something I talked about in the previous series. So there is an episode which was called Making a Living Without Selling Your Soul. I just drew up a simple dialectic here, which I illustrated with these two caricatures with, on one hand, a sort of starving artist trope, someone who just does what is quote unquote true to themselves. But of course, it's not true to themselves, because if they were being completely true to themselves, they wouldn't be starving. So pretty obvious contradiction there. but they certainly fulfill the image of just creating art and sort of idealistically hoping that the world will just take notice of it. And I made the point that the artists that do get noticed, even the ones that appear that way, invariably they're actually very, very wise to the fact that their art needs to speak to someone. Their art needs to make an impact on other people. If your art doesn't make an impact on other people, then it's still art. But I wouldn't say you're an artist in the truest sense of the word, because if it's not making an impact on people, there's a reason for that. And it might be that it's perfectly good art, but it's not being seen by people. So there's all kinds of things to think about there. Let's park that and look at the other extreme now. So if you can see the slides, you'll see there's a guy in a grey suit standing with his hands clasped, looking very well behaved and very compliant. So this is the opposite trope. This is the wage slave image. And this is something that many of us can probably relate to. I can certainly relate to both sides of this dialectic. Now, there's nothing wrong with attempting to meet the needs of others, right? Meet the needs of the world, meet demand. But if that's all you try to do, then here's the irony: you don't actually meet demand at all. And the same can be said of the starving artist. If all you ever do is attempt to do what you impulsively want to do, moment by moment, you actually end up not doing what you want at all. So either side of this taken to its extreme is perverse, let alone inefficient. And it may satisfy some kind of need. It may placate the pull of the self for some time, but it will eventually break down because it's one-sided. So the guy in the grey suit, the wage slave, he may get by for a time, like giving the impression that he's doing things well, doing things right, doing what he's been told. Well, eventually he will please nobody, not least himself, because he hasn't brought in that authenticity and that creativity and actually listened to what it is he needs to bring into the world. He's pretty much just subscribed to the idea that, if it's a flashy looking job and he wins it and he's working for a big company, then, he's a winner, but completely ignoring all the other pretty obvious truths about that. Like, why does this company even need to advertise itself to you in such an ostentatious way if it's as good as it really claims to be? Looks can be deceiving, and the artist certainly understands that. But if he's just trying to be so-called true to himself ad infinitum, with complete disregard for what other people actually need and how his work actually fits into the world, he's not really making art at all. He's just vomiting out his own ideas, his own mind, without that feedback loop that's coming in. Now, how can he generate any good ideas if he's not genuinely engaging with the world? So in order for the artist to actually be an artist, he has to sort of bring on board a little bit of the wage slave. And so it's not about compromise. It's not about balance. It's not about trying to do a little bit of one, a little bit of the other. The key takeaway here is that it's actually doing both. It's actually 100% artist and 100% meeting the needs. Taken to its extreme, that is what this arrives at. But it's discarding the dark side of both. It's discarding the falsity of both sides. This is one of the hardest challenges in life, right? And it's something that everyone can relate to, even those who maybe don't regard themselves as spiritual. And that's one reason I wanted to make this series, because, as I said in the last episode, the dynamics of freedom and power and limitation show up perhaps most obviously in the physical world and in the world of finance and commerce. Every person can relate to how their financial situation influences their life, how their perceived quality of life, how aligned to themselves they feel. A lot of folks believe that if they had more money, then their lives would be better. And they're correct. They're not wrong about that. Money can improve things a lot. But if you're of a master-slave mindset, it can also simply amplify and exaggerate those underlying proclivities. And if you have no respect for money, you don't understand money, you haven't engaged in a dialectic around money and the world of commerce, then you're going to contradict yourself the moment you get any money, right? You're going to blow it all on, what was it George Best said, I spent most of my money on women and cars and the rest I just squandered. Well, you'll end up a bit like that. And The reason it doesn't have any long-term sustainability is precisely because it doesn't consider the big picture, because it's self-contradictory. It cannot be aligned with itself because it's not looking at every factor. It's not making the link between cause and effect. So one solution, one simple trick or a little tip here is to just get inspired, figure out what is actually lighting you up. And simple as this sounds, this is often a pretty big clue. What is it that you feel would take more energy not to do than to do? Sounds simple, right? But of course, discovering this is actually often part of the shadow work process. It's often aided by conversation. And afterwards, you think, oh man, like that was so obvious. Why didn't I see that? And one reason you didn't see that potentially is because actually doing it, as easy as it sounds, right? Why is it that you don't do it? And the reason for that is psychological. It's all about inner conflict and tension. It's all about conditioning from the world you've come from, how your parents wanted you to be, how your teachers wanted you to be, what society told you should be, even in its most generic wage slave form, like this guy on the right here in the grey suit, versus what you really actually need to be and what would be true expression of what you are already implicitly. So it's all good saying, well, just do what inspires you. But many people see that as just completely impractical. And of course, the truth is it's not impractical because you are creating your life already. If you feel that it's not happening because there's just too many external limitations, of course there are external limitations, but you always choose how you respond to those. Now, there's another side to this, and we're going to be talking about that, and that's, well, if you go too far down that side of the dialectic, you end up like you're one of these people who just says, just stamp out your guilt, just smash the resistance, just don't feel anything. As long as you're making money, jobs are good. And that's an equally fallacious, not to mention unethical approach to getting things done. And so I want to go next to a quote by Valentin Tomborg, who anonymously wrote this book, Meditations on the Tarot, but as far as I understand, it was revealed after his death that he wrote this. Anyway, I'm assuming it is correctly him. He said, "He who sees the beauty of that which he recognizes as true cannot fail to love it. And in loving it, the element of constraint in the duty prescribed by the true will disappear. Duty becomes a delight." So there's a lot in this. And what this brings up for me is this idea of, on one hand, the need to work within limitation, which limitation is contained within freedom. Every limitation is set by an act of freedom. So you're never going to escape limitation, but it's recognizing that and working within it on one hand. And that means recognizing that there's a distant point that involves a reconciliation of freedom or your free will and limitation. And you take that to its ultimate extreme and it becomes something truly perfect. We can give all kinds of names to this. And that we contain a spark of that ourselves. And so we're moving towards that, bound by limitation. And at the same time, we have complete freedom, metaphysically, to do anything. You can choose to do anything you want right now. And there's certain physical restrictions, of course, but in principle, you can attempt to do anything. And so how do you align those two? And this is the play element. This is what Schiller referred to as the play motive. So true contribution and meaningful work is a lot like play. And if it doesn't feel like play, because it's not going to feel like play all the time, but it should feel like play some of the time. And maybe from one perspective, a pretty good aim is to get your work to feel more like play as much as you can. When it doesn't feel like play, it's like, well, why is that? What's going on? Don't be alarmed or surprised if it doesn't feel like that. I remember when I first started a business in my mid-20s and I had a bit of success early on. I really thought I'd made it, and I had a terrifying shock when I had all kinds of problems hit me in quick succession soon after that. So I had a supplements business and I was selling on Amazon and I was doing pretty well. Like I became number one in a particular category. And then next thing I notice, new competition comes on the scene, starts faking reviews. We're going to be talking about that as well. And then Amazon suspended my account for spurious reasons and then just inexplicably reactivated it 2 weeks later without explaining anything. And then thirdly, I had a problem with my stock. So I had to return a bunch of stock and couldn't sell it anymore. So it was just a disaster, like a triple whammy. And so I went from thinking I've really solved it, really made it, and all the way back down to just Yeah, and that is an example of irony, right? We talked about irony quite a lot in our series on the shadow map. In other words, like the more you get over to one side, the more the world or the universe or your mind has to conspire to bring it back to center, to try and not back to zero, but to encourage you down the path of reconciliation, because otherwise you remain partial and that is unsustainable. So it has to happen. This is not something that God does to you. Not quite. It's not quite how it works. It's the only way things can possibly work. And so if you have a moment like that, or a day or a week or a month like that, or however long, if your whole life has felt like that, I'll be asking questions. But if you're having a tough year, don't be surprised, right? But also use this idea of play and inspiration to guide you back to vocation. So for those who are watching on video, the image I've got here, AI generated, is of a guy, an architect, drawing a house. He's just drawing a house, and there's actually a beautiful house in front of him, and what appears to be some kind of pond or lake, and a beautiful little staircase leading up to the house. And it looks like it's early evening, and you've got all kinds of nice decor and objects in the house, like a stool and a couple of pieces of art, perhaps, and a nice kitchen, and so on. So he's contributing value. He's at the same time, he's contributing something, he's putting work in, he's contributing effort. He's probably going to have to rest at the end of the day. He couldn't do this 24 hours a day. It's hard, right? It's hard on one level, and it's very enjoyable on another level, and contributing. And there's nothing more gratifying, arguably, than doing something that only you can do, or doing it well, and giving that to someone else. Contributing value and getting paid for it. That's good too, right? Getting paid for something that anyone else could do, or that you don't truly believe in, doesn't feel too great. But getting paid for something that you know is actually contributing more value even than you're getting back, well, that's a form of generosity, and that's a key part of the habit 4 as well. And that's where all creativity comes from. So that's the end of that message. Now, I mentioned Schiller just now, and he said famously that man only plays when he is, in the fullest sense of the word, a human being. And he is only fully a human being when he plays. So Schiller placed a lot of value on the idea of play. I wouldn't say you're not a human being if you're not playing, but philosophically you can see where he's coming from. Is that sense of play is a synthesis. That is the centrum. Because if you're just like a kid will play, right? A kid will play, and it's very fun to play as a kid, partly because it's what you need to do. You're learning so much. And it's not only enjoyable, but it's actually really good for you. That's why kids do it. It's why animals do it as well. But if you're in your 40s, no judgment here, but if you're playing at something that doesn't really have any other purpose other than to distract you from your own inattention, that's an issue. If you're like this guy on the previous slide who's worked a long, hard day, and look, there's nothing wrong with coming home watching a film. There's nothing inherently evil or self-contradictory or retrograde about that. But if you're doing it out of an addiction because it's being used as a way to try and avoid something, then is that really play? Again, if we take these two extremes and imagine we've got another dialectic here, if you're just like heedlessly following your whims, then that's an extreme. But on the other hand, if all you're trying to do is just chase some arbitrary notion of what you think of as success, or some externally measured metric of success, whatever that might be, a certain job title, income, profit, revenue, then that's not in the middle either. So what Schiller's getting at here is this place in the middle, this sweet spot where you are truly acting in accordance with yourself in that moment. You're partaking in creation. Play implies freedom. That's the point. And the guys that came after him, people like Schelling, no less, and Hegel, were all about freedom. And they did meet, so they obviously influenced each other in a big way. But partaking in creation, right, you're not partaking in creation when you're just monging out, watching endless series of your favorite Netflix show or whatever. That's more, depending on how you're doing it and why you're doing it and the motivation, that could be more kind of self-avoidance than self-knowledge. But there's always a place for these things. So this all sits within my 7 habits model. Like pretty much everything I talk about can be slotted in here somewhere. And this whole series really is all about habit 4, which I've termed to contribute your unique and specific value. But that too also breaks down into 3 facets. Every habit has 3 facets. And they are to, so 1, know yourself, right? But in a factual way. This is all about knowing yourself. It's all about the actualization and discovery of self. But this means to know like your unique set of facts. So to understand yourself, not so you can say, okay, well, this is me. I'm an ENFJ and I am a Taurus. And that's just those things. If you know my work, yeah, there's a lot of value in all of that. If it's personality type, archetypal dynamics, symbolism, tarot birth charts. I use these tools as a starting point for coaching often. And yet, I must make clear that these aren't the thing in themselves. These aren't what define you. They're ways of knowing the self. And so in a similar kind of way, you might know many, many things about yourself, and that's very useful as a kind of map. Just with that caution, though, not to fall in love with the idea at the expense of understanding the reality that it represents. So that's facet 1, know your unique set of facts. And facet 4.2 is meeting needs, or meeting the specific needs of the world. So if I was to just jump back to that slide of the 2 characters, you've got the starving artist and the wage slave. Pretty clearly, these represent those 2 facets, but taken to corrupted and distorted extreme. They're not really practicing those facets because they're not considering the other side. They might look like they are. Like the artist is just really okay, this is me. I'm going to live how I want. Great. All praise to you. But to completely neglect the other side actually betrays itself as well. That's why it's self-contradictory. And in exactly the same way, if all you ever did was meet the needs of the world, well, then you're not meeting your own needs. And then how are you in any position to meet anyone else's needs if you're not meeting your own? Pretty obvious, right? Pretty clear when you think of it that way. But it can be very useful to, like, as I did many times in the previous series, look at examples of these kinds of dialectics and take them to extreme. So a relevant one here might be the idea of efficiency. And I've just displayed a shadow map on the screen displaying efficiency versus being considerate or understanding other people's needs. This is a dialectic. Don't worry if you haven't seen this map in action yet. You don't need to understand it fully here. I'll just simply say that efficiency taken to its notional extreme might look something like ruthlessness, right? If all you care about is the appearance of efficiency, then it actually might start to become something more like ruthlessness. That's your danger zone. And people who are very efficient often have this as a danger. I call it the power position or the danger zone. And so when it becomes ruthless, the great irony is that it's not actually efficient at all. But in your mind, you've put so much energy and momentum into that quality or that trait that it's very, very hard for you to kind of come out of it and start embracing something that feels completely alien. And so that might be being considerate or being like a caregiver. You can think about this in archetypal forms, like the commander versus the caregiver. And of course, you can't truly be a commander unless you're prepared to be a bit of a caregiver too. The reverse is true as well. And so the shadow of the really efficient person might be someone like a pushover, someone who just has so little regard for efficiency that they basically just do nothing other than try to meet other people's emotional needs. And again, that too is self-contradictory. It's subject to a tremendous irony because the more you just try to meet other people's needs, well, that might work for a little while, a few years, or it might work well enough in most situations. But at some point, usually in adulthood, you're going to notice that this doesn't work anymore. And not only are you not meeting other people's needs anymore, maybe you're trying to be a bit more efficient, you're trying to be a caregiver, and rather than being a bit efficient and a bit of a caregiver, you end up being neither. This isn't a balance even. In your attempt to compromise, you end up just betraying both. You're neither considerate nor efficient. So not only you not being a caregiver, you're actually being ruthless now. It's not uncommon to find people who are so intent on looking like a caregiver that they become perfectly ruthless. It's the last thing they want to think about themselves. It's the last way they'll see themselves. That is shadow work, right? This is understanding what's been left behind. And that in order to be truly efficient, you have to be a bit considerate too. And so, moving back to slides here, in exactly the same way, you can't really meet the needs of the world unless you know your facts. And you can't really know your facts unless you're willing to meet the needs of the world. They're two sides of the same coin. And then thirdly, in this three facet series here, there's generosity. And I mean this in the sense of bringing into existence something that didn't exist before, creating something, generating something. Generosity, right? Comes from the same root. And this could be, sure, this could be something financial. Why not? This could be something based on your resources, but it's also very likely to be your energy in some ways. This is also the way you actually behave, not just in work, but outside of work. There's nothing about this that says you have to do it at work. You have to start at 9 and finish at 5, or whatever a work day is these days. What we call work is really just the formal arrangement through which this is practiced. And if it's not ultimately generative, then is it really work? And what it means to be generative is that it brings something into existence that didn't exist before, like I said. But what that really means is that it gives out more than it takes. So in applying effort, you actually produce something. Now, a very simple example of this is going to sound cheesy, I'm afraid, but if you smile at someone, then it doesn't really cost you anything, right? Now, I'm certainly not saying you should go around smiling at everyone like some gormless lunatic. That's not what this is about. And there are folks that do that. And, just a few weeks ago, I passed, I would say, a religious person in the street. I won't say any more than that. And they tried to grasp my attention. And they were very, very polite. And they were very, very friendly. And it was completely false. I realized it straight away and I walked on because you might be surprised, maybe, I don't know, maybe not, because the assumption often is that, well, you just must be smiling with everyone, right? You must be nice to everyone. Isn't that generous? Well, no, because everything's a dialectic, right? If someone is trying to steal your time and attention, you're under no obligation to honor that in any way. You might ask me, how on earth did I know? I just knew, right? I knew the organization this person was from. I knew exactly what they were doing and why they were doing it. I won't share all the details here, but it probably would have invited a further interaction that I didn't have time for at that. It wasn't something I should have, in my right mind, chosen to do at that time. In another context, maybe. So that's not really generosity, right? Generosity isn't just in exactly the same way I just explained, like this being considerate to everybody all the time, to the point of being a pushover. That's not generosity. Generosity, by definition, is a kind of synthesis. It's generative because you bring two things together and something new, a third thing comes from it. So that means that if someone really needs something that you have to offer them and it costs you nothing to give it, but it means a great deal to them, from the perspective of spirit itself, like, why wouldn't you go through that? Why wouldn't you offer that up? So there's many examples I could call upon whether it's a good idea. Like, usually if someone smiles at you in public, it's probably a good idea to smile back. Not necessarily always. But yeah, take every opportunity to be generous, and that includes being conscientious in your work. This is like doing work as though you were doing it for yourself. Whatever your job is, if you're like this architect, act as though you were designing your own house. Why would you draw some kind of line between your own house and someone else's house? That doesn't sound very integrated, right? So, of course, in the modern commercial world, we often talk about competition, and to an extent, I think competition is unavoidable, and competition certainly does, to an extent, bring out our best. But if we were to spend our entire lives in competition, we're clearly not being ourselves, right? We're clearly not moving on, because life is not inherently about competition. It certainly might appear that way if you look at nature, and if you look at capitalist economics, is largely built on this premise. And for transactional things, it does work to a large extent. At least it works to move things forward, but it doesn't take you all the way. So, as I said earlier, wherever you are competing, and to the extent that you compete, is an area where you're not fully actualizing yourself. And this is precisely why companies and brands must differentiate. They must always have originality. If you're thinking of starting a business, this is something you really have to consider: is why you, what makes you different. If you're just thinking to capitalize on an existing need, a demand, and do no unique offering within that industry or that niche, by all means try it. You'll probably make a few sales. I've tried it, and it's very hard work, and it doesn't last forever, and you will eventually get eaten up by people who do innovate. And you might feel like innovation and originality is a whole lot of work and a lot of effort. There's a lot less work and effort than doing things the hard way, which is to just copy, to do Me Too products. And the same goes for you as a person in life. Wherever you're trying to or wherever you feel you have to compete with someone, even in a social setting, even psychologically, this is also pretty key to shadow work, how shadow work is usually taught and practiced. If you feel jealous or if you feel threatened by someone, there might be good reasons to feel threatened by some folks, but often it's more than that, right? It's what is it that this person is reflecting back? We're not going to go there now because the whole last series was all about that, right? It's more complex than many make out, but there's usually something from that we can take. Do they reflect back some of our own falsity? If we see ourselves as the most athletic person in the room, right, and someone else comes in and they're really athletic and maybe stronger than us or fitter than us, how do you feel about that? And what's that showing you? Is that showing you where you're actually not sovereign in yourself? Why do you need to be seen that way? And if you see this other person as reflecting some of that, then clearly that's something that you don't truly hold or own, or that it's not wholly you. Because if it was, then it wouldn't bother you. So there's a lot we can take away from that. And there's a perfect analogy really in the world of business and work as well. Now, I'm sure that some of you are sitting there thinking, what, no competition? Well, no, of course there's going to be competition at many stages. But what I'm talking about here is not just how business is and where it's come from, but where it's going. I'm not saying that competition will ever be done away with. No, competition's here to stay for sure. But think of it more holistically, insofar as seeing competition as a way to understand and differentiate. And when you are completely differentiated, right, it's this theoretical future point of perfection. There'll be no more competition. So it's not saying do away with competition. It's just saying see it for what it is and see what it tells you about yourself and your offering. And understand that what you're really doing is you're engaging in a creative process. Hence why on the screen here, I've mentioned competition versus creativity. And if you see the world of work and contribution as something fundamentally creative and as an opportunity to create, you'll create a fundamentally different kind of business. But if you're just seeing it as a competition, well, you'll also make your own bed. You will continue to abide by that kind of mindset, and you'll find yourself in competition, and that means you'll be in conflict, and that means you'll be having to resolve that conflict, and that's good. That's all part of the journey. But just be aware, just be conscious that that's not the end game. It's actually just a means of moving forward. It's a means of figuring out where you're not fully differentiated yet. So it's good, but not in itself. Just like conflict. Conflict is good. Great. Conflict shows you the way. That's what competition is, right? It's a kind of conflict. So I mentioned Adam Smith earlier. He was a famous Scottish philosopher, pretty much founded the theory of modern capitalism. And he wrote a number of books. He wrote The Wealth of Nations. And he conceived of this idea of the invisible hand. So I've got a quote from him here, a couple of quotes, in fact. And I'm going to start with this one. And he says that every individual neither intends to promote the public interest, nor knows how much he is promoting it. He intends only his own security, and by directing that industry in such a manner as its produce may be of the greatest value, he intends only his own gain. And he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. So I'm putting forward this quote, not because I agree with it 100%, but because it captures, well, the genesis of modern capitalism, the thinking behind it. It contains a great wealth of truth, and it also contains some fallacies, which I think have become easier to see 250 years later. So give Adam Smith some credit. He was writing this, I think, in the nearer the sort of mid-late 1700s. And it was pretty revolutionary. So the idea that if a so-called rational actor in a transaction, as a business owner, someone going to work, whoever it is, acts in accordance with their own interests, they're trying to say maximize profits and minimize their costs, and maximize turnover, minimize their costs, and try and maximize profit. And assuming these things are all perfect measures of some idea of well-being, then they promote their own gain. But in doing so, they're actually kind of negotiating. So what he's really saying here, he wouldn't have thought about it in these terms, I don't think. But what he's essentially or effectively saying is that in resolving your own problems, you're actually engaging in a synthesis. You're engaging in a dialectic. And in doing that, you're actually becoming less self-contradictory. Because if you're just trying to charge as much as possible, you're not actually considering anyone else in that, right? Or if you're just giving things away, you're not considering yourself at all. And so the theory is that pricing mechanisms through competition should optimize prices. They should bring prices to where they should be. Now, in reality, it rarely works out this way for all kinds of reasons. Because markets aren't free, that's one reason. Because we're going to be talking about this as well, like this, how deception is everywhere. Rather than actually listen to market forces, actors in this great game, they try and find ways around them. They don't want to listen to market forces. It's difficult to do that. It requires being honest. It requires looking at yourself. And so global firms are always often looking for these expedient ways forward. And in the end, they often try and do what, essentially charging what they can, as opposed to what is fair, what is right. Now, it's no one's job to force anyone to do what's right, okay? With exception to where, okay, they're breaking the law. That whole process of discovering what is the best legal system, well, there is no best legal system. There's a process, right? There's a way of discovering these things over time. It's not my job or anyone's job to tell anyone what the right answer is there, what the right price is. God, no. Certain nations have tried that and it went horribly wrong. However, it is the role of the individual to work out their own conflicts, not because anyone told them to, but because they themselves will bear the brunt of not doing that. It's just, Hegel would have probably said it was a metaphysical inevitability in the end. So yeah, I'm not saying it's because I agree with it. I'm saying it's true to an extent. This has produced a lot of good in the world, and it still does today. But like any idea, it falls down in the end. And so for the last 250 years, it's worked pretty well, but it's producing diminishing returns. And there's many reasons for that. And where we don't want to see those reasons, they will force themselves upon us in the end. So next quote from Adam Smith, he says, on a similar theme, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk of them, of our necessities, but of their advantages." Tell that to Khalil Gibran. I think he would have disagreed. And he's not speaking for anyone but himself, I would say. I mean, he believes he is, but actually a lot of people do what they do, not only because of self-interest, as he phrases it, self-love. It's not self-love, it's probably better termed as self-interest, although he does say that too. It's not only in regard to their own interests, it's also in regards to their humanity. And if it's not, I mean, how miserable does that sound? Right? So if you're just working because it makes money for you, well, firstly, is that really self-interest? Right? If it's just raw efficiency, is it really efficient? Is ruthlessness efficient? It may be efficient to some end, but if that end is corrupt or malign in some way, is it really efficient? Is it really effective? Because if what you're looking to do is harming yourself, then why are you looking to do it, right? So in a similar way, in the previous quote, he says, individuals do not intend to promote the public interest, nor knows how much he's promoting it. It was of its time, right? These quotes, and it shows where it came from. And he brought a lot of value to the world, Adam Smith, but I'm just explaining how this approach to work inevitably falls down in the end. And it might take 250, 300 years for it to fully play out. And when you're in that meme, it's very hard to see beyond it and see outside of it. Especially if you're, as what's the quote? It's very hard to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. I'm not sure what the source of that quote is. I think it's attributed to many people. But it's true, right? If we don't want to believe something, we're going to struggle seeing it. And if your income depends on it, why shouldn't it depend on it? Because you're human, you're partial, you're part of the unfolding of history. And every meme or every stage in that journey plays a role and also becomes corrupt. That's precisely what the shadow map is illustrating. So then, just going to end here by talking about this concept. You might have heard of it. It's called the long tail. And it's very simple, right? This was first actually used as a way to explain search term, right? It's a marketing term that meant that if you're trying to appear in search rankings, then you might want to target what are called long tail keywords. So if you're trying to sell biscuits, don't just try and appear for biscuits, appear for dark chocolate McVitie's biscuits or something. I'm not trying to advertise anything here. I'm just making a point and looking at biscuits in front of me. So that's the point, right? It's about saying that perhaps 50% of all search terms that people are searching might be classified as long tail keywords. So they're not searching biscuits, they're searching something like 3 or 4 or 5 words together. And you can much more easily rank for those keywords. It's a lot harder to rank for the big keywords, right? It's a lot easier to rank for these more obscure keywords. Does this sound familiar? Because this is a lot like that creative as opposed to competitive mindset. At least it's a step in that direction because you're not having to compete as much for those small keywords. And you're also being more tailored and more specific, more niche. It's all about the niche, as we've been reminded for the last 15 years. Why is that? Well, this long tail is a perfect analogy for many other things we see happening in the world. It's not only search terms. It's not only what people are looking for. It's also what people are doing. It's what people are supplying. It's how people are expressing themselves. So gone are the days when you had to be like in Adam Smith's time, right? What do you want to be? Well, not everyone can be a philosopher. Maybe you want to be a blacksmith. Maybe you want to be a butcher, a brewer, or a baker. For some reason, I once looked at the village I grew up in, which today probably has, I'm guessing, 5,000 people, several thousand people living there. I don't know why I was doing this, but I looked up the census that was taken from that village about 150 years ago. And there was like 3 bakers, 5 or 4 blacksmiths or something, a bunch of farmers, and that was it. And it was like, what is your profession? And it was almost like you had to kind of choose from a pre-selected list. Who is the head of the family, right? And so traditionally the man would have had some profession and then his wife would have stayed at home, and that's how it worked. But the fact that there was less than 1 page of names on there of professions, and they were most of them from a very small shortlist of potential professions. So none of us were alive back then, but just try and get your head around the change that's occurred since then. This is the long tail, just getting longer and longer and longer. And so, talk about the niche, there might be a limited number of niches. But you know what? You are the niche. That's the point here. You don't really have to compete with anyone other than, or at least where you're not being fully aligned with yourself. That's the point. So the true niche is you. But in practical terms, finding a niche is really just a way of getting closer to that. And you'll always be probably navigating work in this kind of way. But the less you can compete, the better. So the long tail now really refers not only to what people are searching for, what the demand is, but also the supply side. What are people actually offering and bringing to the world? And so again, I see this through a psychological lens, and I think this is nothing more than an expression of selfhood and expression coming into the world, right? This is people stepping up and embracing more of themselves. Not everyone's doing that, but it doesn't take many to set the trend in motion. So maybe a lot of people are just doing this because, hey, it's what's working now, and their digital marketing guru told them that this is the way to get results, as it were. But the only reason this happened is because someone thought about it and someone took a leap and someone said, I'm not going to do things that way. I want to do things differently. I'm going to launch a course that's never been done before. I'm going to talk about something that's never been talked about before. So this is very much an expression of spirit itself, working through people, doing new things, bringing what's implicit into actualized reality. So hope you found that useful. That's the end of this particular episode. This has been an episode on work versus contribution, the subtle but important difference between the two, talking about attitude that you do well to bring to your working life, and how livelihood is an effort. It has to be, by definition, pretty much. But it's also an honor and a privilege. And to do it well means dancing with that play instinct, where you're voluntarily facing up to limitation and contributing, generating. In the next couple of episodes, we're going to be diving into those 3 facets that I mentioned in this episode. So the next one, we're going to be talking about how you can actually know your facts. There's a number of actual tools you can use. You've probably heard of many of them, personality types being one of them, and the shadow map being another one. So we'll be looking at that. And then, of course, in the next episode, we'll be talking about how you can actually meet the needs of the world around you. And again, this is all so specific to you that all I'm offering here are tools, tips, ways of thinking about things, ways of getting your mind moving in this direction. None of this is the point, right? The point is you. The point is what you do with all this. So with that said, I will thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.